Hi everyone, I'm Maria Magdalen, and it was lovely to meet some of you at the LGB Alliance conference last Friday. Now, a lot of you asked me to react to John Oliver, but to be honest, after having endured, Jon Stewart, I haven't even been able to face looking at Oliver's contribution to this debate, let's say. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. But another video that a few people requested that I respond to is by a YouTuber I've never heard of before called Shaun, which is yet another hate fest against JK Rowling. Why do these nutcases bother trying to smear JKR? What will it take to penetrate their thick skulls that she is invincible? They cannot destroy her. Their hate won't cost her her livelihood, even if she never writes another word. She's not exactly going to end up homeless in the gutter swinging meths to keep warm, is she? And they're never going to stop generations of children and adults enjoying the book she's written so far, or make her less generous in using the wealth that she's accumulated to help others. You want to stop her from doing so much good in the world because she stands with women. Shame on you. In fact, what their hate has done is make her stronger and more determined to fight back. You can see it in what she says now compared to what she was saying a couple of years ago. My God, she must be having 3 Weetabix for breakfast every single day. And if there's one thing I have in common with JK, it is that. I mean, not the Weetabix, but the fact that the hate and the bullying from the gender nutters simply fuels our anger and determination to keep fighting back, and the same goes for countless other women, and a good few men as well. The only way they are going to shut JK up, in my opinion, is to bump her off. And I often have to wonder whether that isn't what the likes of Shaun are hoping for. Keep stirring up the hate against her, and hopefully some crazed fanatic will jump at the chance to be a hero, just like the guy who tried to murder Salman Rushdie a little while ago. And of course there is no surer way to turn the victim into a martyr and provoke a backlash against everyone who is perceived to be on the side of the killer. This is why ordinary Muslims suffer a backlash after every Islamist terror attack, and why ordinary trans-identifying people just trying to get on with their lives quietly get stick for what the trans activist bullies say and do. Okay, so the video by Shaun is called JK Rowling's New Friends, and there is a content warning beneath it saying sexual assaults, violent threats, all the bigotry. I don't remember seeing any sexual assault or violent threats. Mind you, I haven't watched it all yet. But yes, there is plenty of bigotry from Shaun. Nice of him to warn us. I just knew, of course, that King Critical would respond to this video well before I got a chance to do so. So if you've watched his video, it is of course entirely up to you if you want to watch this one and see whether my take on it differs or not. My main reason for wanting to react to this video is because in it Shaun attacks friends of mine, one of whom cannot defend herself because she's dead. I'm talking about my girl Magdalen Berns, who died in September 2019, and whom the haters just can't leave to rest in power or even in peace, because what she said resonated with so many. They have to stoop to trying to besmirch her reputation. They even start Twitter accounts in her name to mock and defame her. I have no words. So this will be a 2-part response. The first part focusing on Magdalen. Here we go.
Magdalen Berns was a British YouTuber who Rowling describes as an immensely brave young feminist who was a great believer in the importance of biological sex and didn't believe lesbians should be called bigots for not dating trans women with penises.
Well, Magdalen was immensely brave, she was young, and she was a feminist, and the rest is true as well. There was also a great deal more to Magdalen than was ever shown online, and it was all good. Well, apart from the smoking.
And because of this, she says, when Rowling followed Berns on Twitter, she was subjected to abuse from trans activists.
Of course she was. The amount of hateful abuse JK Rowling has received from trans cultists is extraordinary, mind-blowing and well documented. Probably the best barometer we have of just how hateful this cult is. Anything to say about this, Shaun? Or is it something you're comfortable just hand-waving away as if it's of no consequence? By the way, if you're wondering how people knew she'd started following Magdalen, it was because some sado had gone through all the people JK was following and listed those who didn't meet with his approval. Magdalen was at the top of the list. I blogged about this and will link below.
So this is the framing. Magdalen Berns and women like her simply believe in the importance of biological sex. They just want their concerns to be heard and they don't want to be called bigots because of them.
Sounds fair enough, doesn't it? So what do you think, Shaun? Do you think lesbians are bigots for being lesbians, defined as same-sex attracted women and refusing to do men, even those LARPing as lesbians? Same the other way round, of course. Are gay men who refuse to accept women into their dating pool, to use a polite term, because they are, well, gay men, are they bigots? Do you think we're bigots for saying sex matters, men can't be women, women can't be men shouldn't be in women's spaces and sports? I think we should be told, with your justifications.
And just because of those things, they and their supporters are bombarded with unwarranted social media abuse.
Correct. The abuse levelled at feminists by trans activists remains the most vile misogyny I've seen online. How about you, Shaun? Anything to say about this stuff?
Now, even if we're trying to be as fair and objective as we can be here, it has to be said that this framing looks rather one-sided, right? All the aggression and abuse is coming from just the one side in Rowling's view. And?
Was that a bit of an exaggeration? I guess it was. To be strictly accurate, 99.5% of the abuse is coming from one side, right? Unless you can produce some screenshots showing feminists saying stuff like this. Sorry if you're watching on your phone or just listening, by the way, but I'm not reading this stuff out.
We are all meek angels with just a few concerns, but we're getting shouted down by completely unreasonable social media abusers.
No, she did not say, nor did she imply that we are meek angels with just a few concerns. All of this is dishonest, what's the word? Oh, framing by you, Shaun. We have many concerns. We are all strong women standing up to a nasty, misogynistic, homophobic ideology and those who promote it, and we are getting horribly abused and bullied for doing so, as are some of our male allies. The cultists use any means at their disposal to try to punish us for our refusal to submit. Threats, reporting us to the police on the most trivial grounds imaginable, trying to get us fired from our jobs or lose our livelihoods without a care for the effect on our families, our children, and even physical violence.
So let's examine this framing. Is how JK Rowling described Magdalen Berns accurate?
Let's just remind ourselves of what JK said. Magdalen was an immensely brave young feminist and lesbian who was dying of an aggressive brain tumour. Magdalen was a great believer in the importance of biological sex and didn't believe lesbians should be called bigots for not dating trans women with penises. Yes, that's accurate. Remember, JK was not writing an essay about Magdalen Berns. She was not writing a profile or a biography. JK was telling her own story and the very small part that Magdalen unwittingly played in it. The few words she uses to describe Magdalen were JK's own impression of her and absolutely accord with those of us who admired her and felt she spoke for us.
What was she actually like?
Well, apart from being brave and clever, she was passionately interested in disability rights. She had a natural empathy with children. She was always on their side. She was brilliant at maths and physics. Do you know, she was offered a job at Google, but she turned it down because she didn't like their ethos. She dreamt of setting up a non-profit, open-source software company. She was honest, chilled, irreverent and funny. I'm reading this description of her from the piece I wrote on the first anniversary of her death. But I don't think you're interested in what she was actually like, are you, Shaun? Your purpose here is to stir up hate against JK Rowling, and to do that you have to stir up hate against Magdalen and make the guilt by association fallacy.
Well, I imagine many of you will be familiar with her now infamous blackface tweet, where she calls trans women, quote, fucking blackface actors who are motivated by sick sexual perversions.
Okay, let's break down this comment, starting with the blackface actors bit. Magdalen was, of course, using the term blackface metaphorically, just as white entertainers from a position of dominance, of greater power, would black up with burnt cork or shoe polish or grease paint and impersonate black entertainers without a care for how that made black people feel, without a care for the insulting racial stereotypes they were perpetuating in the minds of their white audiences. Magdalen was saying it is the same with men putting on what we now quite often call woman face. It's not a bad analogy, in my opinion. Why, even Fionn, who is a trans-identifying man, agrees. I'm including that because I sense Shaun has more respect for the views of other men, especially those in woman face. Where the analogy with blackface falls down, and of course all analogies fall down at some point, is that those blackface actors didn't actually claim to be black, and when the phenomenon of wearing blackface started in the US in the early 19th century, the slavery days, there wouldn't have been anything a black person had that they would have wanted. It's a bit different now, of course, as we've seen with Rachel Dolezal getting appointed to a job and elected to a position intended for African Americans, but send her back to the deep south of the United States in the Jim Crow era. Would she have pretended to be black back then? Would any man claim to be a woman today if he lived in Saudi Arabia or the Yemen? The analogy of men claiming to be women with blackface actors is one that resonates with many of us women. Perhaps, Shaun, you'd care to explain why you don't agree? Okay, now what was the other bit? Oh yeah, you're men who get sexual kicks from being treated as women. You and your dirty perversions, our oppression isn't a fetish, you pathetic, sick. I sense she was a bit angry here, but what is your objection, Shaun? I mean, why else would heterosexual men claim to be women and want to enter spaces where women and or girls are semi-clothed or otherwise vulnerable? Think about it. I'm not going to defend the language Magdalen uses here. She was harsh, and that may be why she had to delete the tweet. She could have used a more temperate expression like, you and your paraphilic disorder, as the DSM-5 puts it. For those who don't know, that is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Health Disorders produced by the American Psychiatric Association. But let's not get all sanctimonious about Magdalen's angry expression, which was in response to a nasty troll, by the way, when you apparently think it's okay for men to disregard the feelings, the dignity and the privacy of women on the basis of some subjective feeling they claim to have. And yet you are trying to paint Magdalen as the villain here. In fairness, I should clarify that while some trans-identifying men are obviously sexually motivated and some are pretty obviously sick, not all are by any means, and actually Magdalen knew that.
You see, Magdalen Berns was not passively voicing concerns. She wasn't simply stating her opinion that biological sex is important.
Nobody said she was, Shaun. Magdalen was a fighter. And she didn't pull her punches, which is what your problem with her boils down to, really, isn't it? How dare these uppity women talk back, hey?
She spent her time attacking transgender identities, which she repeatedly declared were invalid. In her YouTube videos, she consistently made a point of misgendering any trans person she mentioned.
Or, to put it more accurately, Magdalen spent some of her time, but not that much, out of her busy life, actually, making videos on YouTube. In quite a few of them, she reacts to ridiculous statements made by men in womanface. As she was not one of the gender faithful, not a devotee of the gender religion, she didn't submit to the demand that she go along with the deceit of people who claim to be what they are not. I'm just going to show a clip from one such video.
Now, I don't know about you guys, but when I hear that someone's transgender, I immediately want to see how they look and check out their transition and see where it's at.
People can dress how they want, as far as I'm concerned, as long as they don't lie about reality.
So let's have a look at Miss Danielle Moscato.
Let's have a very warm welcome to Danielle.
Ferrin is overcompensating because Danielle Moscato is representing the transgender community and making no effort to be feminine.
Sorry, what?
Flicking the hair and...
How's everybody doing?
Confused.
Qualified silliness.
You're Danielle. Oh, okay.
It's because he's so freaked out by what he said.
You can move closer if you'd like. I'm going to be giving some stuff away.
Actual classic.
And if you want it, it's easier for me to give it to you if you're up here.
Will it be your masculinity? Because that seems like it might be a good thing to give away.
But no. Transgender identity isn't about masculine and feminine stereotypes. It's so much more than that.
Apart from the lack of any bad language from Magdalen, I think that is a pretty typical video of hers. It's not so much an attack, well, obviously to the fragile egos of the trans cultists it is, but what she does is take the piss while at the same time making a serious point. In this case, we have one trans-identifying man attacking another because he has evidently made no effort to look feminine, thereby demonstrating that gender, as exemplified by Theron Mayer, is based on stereotypes and reduces womanhood to a performance that perpetuates them. Naturally, as someone enthralled to that ideology, Shaun won't be interested in engaging with that argument, preferring instead to divert attention from it by defaming those who make it.
She was also more than willing to attempt to ally herself and her cause with figures on the far right.
No, she wasn't, Shaun. Listen, it doesn't matter who makes an argument, it stands or falls on its own merits. What matters is what truth there is in the argument and what is the evidence for it. I feel I've said this 100 times. Magdalen understood that, and I've no idea why Shaun doesn't seem to have grasped it. Unless maybe it just doesn't suit his purpose to do so.
She could be seen on Twitter sharing Breitbart news stories about then neo-Nazi poster boy Milo Yiannopoulos.
Okay, let's not exaggerate. It was only one story reporting on a podcast interview about transgenderism, which is the subject of Magdalen's channel, as it is mine. Unfortunately, that podcast is no longer available, but in the short article summarising it in Breitbart News, Yiannopoulos is reported as having said that the trans movement is profoundly anti-women, which it is. This is not a far-right position. That is also what left-wing feminists like Magdalen and I say too.
Praising him and asking for him to share her YouTube videos.
Well, she said he's glad he named sexism and homophobia in gender identity ideology. Why wouldn't she be? It's not as if she said, "Oh, Milo, sweetie, you're such a darling, thank you," which is what you're trying to make it sound like, Shaun.
She even defended Yiannopoulos after he was widely criticised as a result of condoning, in a podcast, child molestation.
Right, two lies in this one. Before I explain them, I should say that I could not stand Milo Yiannopoulos, and I am not remotely sorry that he seems to have disappeared from public view. But, like Magdalen, and unlike Shaun, I do care about the truth. The first lie is that Yiannopoulos condones child molestation. In the podcast in question, he said that in his teens, and he doesn't specify his age, but it sounds as if he was underage, he had sex with a 28-year-old man. He also said that he, Yiannopoulos, was the predator. He initiated the act. Now, he could have criticised the man he seduced for letting himself be seduced by an underage teenager. I would certainly make that criticism myself. He could have made some comment to the effect that if it had been the other way round, that if the 28-year-old had seduced him, then it would have been fair to call it molestation, even if the kid had enjoyed it. But he didn't do either of those things, and that seems to be why he ended up being vilified as a paedophile. In the very same news article that Shaun quotes from in The Hollywood Reporter, it says, Yiannopoulos took to his Facebook page Sunday night to say, I do not support paedophilia. It is a vile and disgusting crime, perhaps the very worst. There are selectively edited videos doing the rounds as part of a coordinated effort to discredit me from establishment Republicans that suggest I am soft on the subject. He went on to list several examples from his career as a right-wing journalist to prove that he is completely disgusted by the abuse of children. Okay, lie number 2. No, Magdalen did not defend him. That is really despicable. What she does here, as you show quite clearly, Shaun, is voice her suspicion about the timing of the publicising of a video that had been recorded over a year earlier and had been viewable on YouTube ever since, drawing attention to it just after he criticised trans identity on prime time TV is exactly the kind of thing the trans cult do in order to discredit someone, in order to get an influential person who stands up to their cult punished. Ironically, it is exactly what Shaun is trying to do in making this video about JK Rowling.
As a side note here, Berns has also called what she considers trans activism to be a, quote, child safety issue, which is utterly ludicrous when considered in contrast to her defence of a white nationalist who said child sexual abuse could be a, quote, hugely positive experience. That is what he said.
Except, of course, that isn't what Yiannopoulos said. I'm not going to spend any more time defending one misogynist creep from the lies of another. Anyone who cares enough is at liberty to search for Yiannopoulos' name and the, quote, hugely positive experience. I am more concerned to expose the dishonesty of one of those misogynist creeps in his unconscionable defamation of a brilliant and courageous feminist who isn't here to defend herself. It's pretty obvious what Shaun is doing here. Whether Milo is a white nationalist or not, I don't even know. He denied it, but I don't know enough about him. But Magdalen did not defend him on any grounds, not on the grounds of his having underage consensual sex, and not on the grounds of his alleged white nationalism. But Shaun is desperately trying to make it look as if she did, and that by extension she must share his views.
She also had a habit of focusing on George Soros as the person who she claimed was funding the EU transgender lobby, which is a little suspect, especially considered in light of her willingness to pal around with racists.
Oh, this beggars belief. Magdalen did not pal around with racists. As for, she had a habit of focusing on George Soros. A habit? In how many tweets did she state truthfully that he is on the list of sponsors of the EU transgender lobby? Well, 4, apparently. And so what? Anyway, I can't be bothered to repeat what I've already said on this subject, so I'll just show a quick clip from a previous video I made. The Washington Times reported that George Soros has donated vast sums to certain named LGBT campaigning groups through his Open Society foundations, which is a philanthropic venture he started. The report specifies the sums and names the groups. Do you think the Washington Times would just make this up? Do you think they would risk lying about someone as powerful and wealthy as Soros? And what is wrong with him giving money to LGBT groups? Isn't that a good cause? I mean, I can object to it, saying there are worthier causes, but that's just my opinion. Okay, back to Shaun.
So what's my point here?
Well, it's obvious what your point was, Shaun. Your point was to quite unjustly vilify Magdalen and, by association, JK Rowling. Indeed, he goes on to claim that there is a, quote, huge contradiction between the Magdalen Berns described by JK Rowling and the Magdalen Berns who actually existed. No, there wasn't. There isn't. What JK said about Mags was absolutely accurate. But she didn't say very much. Shaun is trying to paint this as a lie by omission. Finally, Shaun refers to Magdalen as
someone who I thought was motivated not by some concern she had about single-sex spaces or a desire to protect her rights, but by her hatred and disgust of trans people.
Well, you would say that, wouldn't you, Shaun? Because you are clearly incapable of understanding why most women don't want to be around men in spaces where we are vulnerable or have them in our sports. But let me remind you that never in any comment or video does Magdalen wish ill on any of those whose arguments she demolishes. Although she is occasionally abusive to individuals, not once does she express hatred for trans people in general, or promote, excuse, or celebrate violence against them or their death, in contrast to those trans activists who weren't content to celebrate her death, but who maliciously continue to try to defame her. People like you, Shaun. That's all. Bye for now.